Evening because it's Sunday night. I am excited to get back in the rhythm of things. I don't know, we got like 2 normal weeks after summer, and then mine and my family's life kind of exploded with a anniversary trip and then a youth retreat. And anyway, it just felt like we were going with our hair on fire, and now we're settling back in to a usual Sunday night kind of thing. And here's the deal. That means we can start working on some of these ideas that I've had stored up all summer. That's what that means, right? During the summer, when we have the summer series, I get to store all of my ideas and then present them when it's not the summertime. So that's what we're going to do. I've got a whole list of notes. And one of the things I was thinking about over the summer, in light of a number of different things, was this idea of citizenship, right? This is I don't know if it's a weird topic or a weird word. It's like a lot of words we say. It seems to be one of those words that everybody knows what it means, but in a much more real sense, nobody really knows what it means. Like, we all kind of have a vague idea of what it means to be a citizen. You're a member, you're a part of something. If you think about, or if you ask generally, people might say, what does it mean to be a citizen? It means you pay your taxes and you protect the homeland. You defend your area or your territory. To be a citizen, you do your civic duty, which feels like using the word in the definition of the word. That feels like cheating. But again, we kind of know what we mean when we say that. You're being a good part of society. To be a citizen of somewhere has some kind of legal standing, and it has some kind of duty or obligation attached to it generally, right? But then I got thinking about what it actually means, right? It has like a standard definition, sure, and paying taxes and defending the homeland would all be part of that. Doing your civic duty, whatever exactly that means, being a good neighbor maybe, would be in that official category. But what about the unofficial way that we more often are using that language? What about the way that is less accurate but more true, if you know what I'm saying? What does it mean to be a citizen? Well, let me say it like this. What about the idea of being a Texan rather than living in Texas? Right? Like, one of those, being a Texan, means you live in Texas, right? But we know that the less official answer is the more true answer. Being a Texan means that you drink Dr. Pepper so much it courses through your veins, right? Being a Texan means you've got 1 or 12 pairs of boots and a couple buckles to match. Being a Texan means you ride your horse to school. That may or may not be what the northern people think of us, just so you know. Like, we know being a Texan means you say y'all, and you're friendly, and you smile, and you have a drawl when you speak, right? Like, this is what being a Texan means. But being a Texan means living in Texas. Like, you see the difference here. And so when I was thinking about citizenship, I was thinking, what does it mean to be a Texan rather than to live in Texas? Sure, the standard definition of being a citizen is good, but I think a real citizen is a lot more than just paying taxes, protecting your homeland, and doing your civic duty. For example, and this is one of the games, I think we even did it in class this morning, one of the games I like to play when you try and understand a word or a concept is, well, what does it mean in real normal life? And then let's try and take that and understand it in light of our faith. And if you ask the question, what does it mean to be a citizen of America? Well, again, you've got your standard answer, and then you've got your true answer, your real answer. Being a citizen of America probably means that you love freedom, right? That when a bald eagle flies by, it's a majestic, magical moment, right? Weirdly, if you live in Canada, it's not as cool, right? They see a bald eagle, they see a hawk, they're the same. For us, if a bald eagle flies by, chills. Right? Okay. Being a citizen of America could mean that you are hyper-individualistic. There's a hallmark characteristic of our society and our culture. Our citizens are extremely individual, almost to a fault. Certainly, being a citizen of America means you let your voice be heard. Being a citizen of America could mean that you are, well, strong-willed, also hard-headed. Both of those are true and similar, right? And so certainly, like, this is when people think about what is an American citizen. They're someone who loves freedom. They're someone who is individualistic. They're someone that is pulled themselves up by the bootstraps mentality. Being a citizen of America probably means, and again, these are generalities, but it probably means that you love to eat, particularly fried food and cheeseburgers, the most American food of all foods, the cheeseburger and the hot dog. Listen, there's an element of diet when you think about an American citizen. I mean, they're going to have their hot dog and their Coke. Of course, it's a Coke. Being a citizen of America probably means you're obsessed with football. That might just be me, though. It means that you bleed red, white, and blue, right? Have you heard that phrase? Which is technically the scientifically most accurate colors to bleed, because you have red blood cells and white blood cells. And before you, like, when you just look, it's blue. Do you see what I'm saying? I think that means we're the best. Anyway, that also is part of being an American. Anyway, it means that being an American means you give handshakes, right? Like when you meet somebody, you shake their hand, sometimes way too firm. Sometimes being an American means you shake someone's hand in a way that tries to assert dominance. And everybody knows that one guy at church that shakes your hand and tries to put you in the floor. When you were a kid, you remember you thought maybe squeezing back was the right choice, and then you learned really quickly it wasn't the right choice. Like, this is part of being an American. We shake hands. We shake hands when we make a deal. We shake hands when we meet somebody. We shake hands when we're excited. I remember watching, it was some old clip of, I don't know, 70s, 80s. It was before I was alive. And there was a celebratory handshake that these people did. And to me, that's weird a little, because that's a little dated, right? Like, we high five or we knuckles or something, you know. But they're these guys in suits and ties, no less, and they said, oh, ha, ha. And they were just going around shaking each other's hands in celebration, because that's what we do. It's kind of how Americans do things. And of course, if you're a citizen of America, it means you shoot fireworks on the 4th of July, or at least enjoy fireworks on the 4th of July. What I'm trying to do here is paint a picture of an American citizen. What does it mean to be an American citizen? It means you have certain values. It means you have certain customs. It means that you watch baseball to pass the time. Do you ever think about that baseball's America's pastime? That means it's the most boring sport. That's what that means, objectively. Anyway, sorry, tangent here. Being an American citizen means that the parts of you that go without saying all very loudly say America, okay? Right? The parts of you that you don't think about all come out in a similar way to that of an American person. Your customs, your values, your pastimes, your language, your holidays, your diet, they are all American in some form or fashion. Certainly, we're speaking in generalities, and the fact that I have to qualify that shows you how hyper-individualistic our society is, but you understand the sentiment behind an American citizen. It's someone who exemplifies these characteristics, these traits, these customs. They do things in a certain way that is or shows themselves to be American. So, as I was thinking about this, one of the cool things that I realized was when God created a people and he gave them this identity, he actually created a model Israelite citizen. If you go back into the Old Testament and you read the story of, you read story for several chapters, a whole book of stories, and then you get to the story of the 10 plagues, which is like the seminal moment of God delivering his people. Right after that, you throw the brakes on and come to a screeching halt, where you begin to read not one or two, but dozens of chapters of very dense, ancient law code. And when you look at it, you're like, if you're like me, you're like, please get me back to the narrative. Get me back to the stories of these captivating heroes and these flawed people who make mistakes and end up in these situations, and God's providence is seen throughout it all. Get me back to that. That stuff is engaging. But man, is it hard to read 3 chapters about cleanliness. It just is, and they seem weird and antiquated and like that was written for someone else that isn't me. But what's really interesting is when you sort of zoom out from just the law by itself and look at the whole law code that's given, what God is really doing here with this law code, one of the many things he's really doing, is he is crafting a citizen. He's crafting a culture and a people, and he is giving them all of these things that we think of when we think of an American citizen. He's giving them customs, and he's giving them holidays, and he's giving them language and values. So let's look at a couple of these. The first one that I think stands out probably the most are the holidays. In the Old Testament, there are at least, I believe, 5 different major national holidays, as well as the Sabbath that comes every week. When God brings his people out of Egypt, and again, you got to remember the context for this. These people have been slaves in Egypt for 400 years. I think I say this every time to drive that point home, but they were more Egyptian than we are American. America has been around for 250 years-ish. 240, almost 250 years. That was close enough. All right, listen. Yeah, right, 249 years and a half, 249 and a half years, okay? So that's a long time. I think most of us would distinctly say, at this point, this many generations removed from wherever we came from before here, we've got a pretty set in stone and established American culture 249 and a half years in. They had been in Egypt for 400 years, nearly twice as long as we have been in America. Now listen, what that means is, like I said, they were more Egyptian than we are American. The culture, the customs, the attachment to the land, that being the idea of this is my family's home, that was very much ingrained into the people that God delivered out of Egypt. And so he doesn't just deliver people who were Egyptian, but Egyptian slaves. We've talked about this before, but their entire identity was wrapped up in how much they could produce. What were they worth? They were worth as many bricks as they could make and no more. Fortunately, no less, but certainly no more. And so God pulls these people who have some identity, but really just an identity that's anchored to their oppression, and he pulls them out, and he gets them into the wilderness, and what do? But long for the identity that they had back in Egypt. They have this yearning for the old tyranny, which is bizarre until you realize God had just pulled these people out of a place that they knew and put them in a place that they didn't know. And so now what does he have to do with these people? He has to rebuild or reestablish a culture, an identity that these people have. And one of the ways he does that primarily are the holidays. Just a couple of these. One that is probably the biggest holiday that is a commemoration of actually that time when God delivered the people from Exodus chapter 12 is the Passover. This was the time when the people would remember their deliverance out of Egypt. They would eat a meal that told their story, which was even their origin story as the people of God. And it was a time when they would remember, and they were instructed to tell their children about that time when God birthed a people. He delivered a people out of slavery and into freedom. They also had the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They would have the Feast of Weeks, and they would have the Feast of Booths. All of these are again, anchored to part of this people's story. So it wasn't just, hey, we need some holidays so people can have a good rhythm to their year. I think that was part of it. That's part of a culture. But it was also, we need some holidays that remind these people of their story, who they really are. Well, I mean, you can see that parallel to American holidays. We celebrate the 4th of July. We celebrate Thanksgiving to remember that time, I don't know, that some Pilgrims and Indians got together. I don't know. That's how I learned it when I was little. I don't think that's the right answer anymore now. But listen, these are parts of what holidays do, is they create a citizen. Someone who has roots in an identity and in a story, and that's what these holidays, how these holidays work. Like we already said, the Bible creates a history by using the Passover. It helps these people connect to where they came from. Constantly throughout the rest of the Old Testament, when God addresses the people, he reminds them that he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The implication, you're the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He constantly reminds them that I am the God who brought you up from the land of Egypt. The implication, you are the people who were brought up from the land of Egypt. At this point, in many of the cases where God reminds people of that, they in fact were not the people who were brought up from the land of Egypt. They were the descendants of the people, and yet still, this reminder, this history, anchored them in that identity. This God in the Old Testament also gives them a set of values to live by. When you look at Israel's laws surrounding the tabernacle, these holiness laws, they emphasize how God feels about his people and how his people are meant to be different. Holy meaning set apart or sanctified, or short form slang term is just different, holy, different. And so as it relates to their temple, they were extremely different. Their worship didn't look like any worship of the day. Their idols, what idols? They didn't have them. In fact, they weren't meant to make any images of their God. Their proximity to deity was very serious. I think we've all probably heard the story about how when the priest would go into the most holy place on the Day of Atonement, they would tie bells around his waist so that if he ever quit moving and you quit hearing the bells, they knew to pull him out with the rope because no one else was going in there. It was a holy space. And so God gave them an understanding of holiness that they had as part of their values and identity. He also gave them this idea of justice and compassion. This is visible all throughout the laws, but over and over and over again, the alien and the orphan and the widow, the sojourners among you, God is regularly concerned with these people having access to fair treatment, which is bizarre. Because you know what you do with aliens, orphans, and widows in any other culture? And certainly the culture that they just came from in Egypt? You enslave them, lest they rise up against you and join your enemies, as Pharaoh said in Exodus chapter 1. Well, these values are different. People have an inherent value to them that is different from how many bricks they can produce. Communal responsibility. Several of the sacrifices share the whole community would share the guilt of sin rather than just individualism, which was a really big deal and again would have stood in some contrast to the cultures of the day. Another part of culture that God gives these people is their diet, which is part of their customs, I would say. We have American customs. They had ancient Israelite customs, and one of those was their diet. They didn't eat, they had categories of clean and unclean foods. And we've talked about this a little bit before. We kind of have that, right, as Americans. Cats would be an unclean food. Not because there's anything inherently disgusting about eating. Even saying that feels weird, right? Not that there's anything inherently unsanitary. Even that is a true statement that feels weird. But like in reality, there's nothing wrong with cat meat. But all three ways I've tried to say that feel wrong, and you all know it, right? Because we have a code. We've got values, or customs, I should say, of clean and unclean food. Our diets, there are things that we call food that other people call pets. There are things that we call pets that other people call food. And that's part of what it means to be an American citizen. Well, God did the same thing with his people when he brought them out of Egypt. Hey, there are things you guys ate in Egypt that we're not eating any of that anymore. There are things these other nations call clean that you are going to call unclean. And there's a certain criteria of animal and well, we'll get to the status as well, but certain criteria of animal that is clean or unclean that you are or are not allowed to eat. And you can find a lot of that in Leviticus chapter 11. Customs. So another custom that God gave his people has to do with their clothing. In Numbers 15, God said that the Israelites were supposed to wear these tassels on their garments, which is really interesting. There was symbolism and meaning behind this. It had to do with, again, reminding these people of who they were and who God was, but it was weird. It was a distinct marker of this new people. They're going to wear these garments, and on the four corners of their garments, they're going to have these tassels. He also talked about in Leviticus 19 not sewing two kinds of garments, two kinds of fabrics together, that you guys aren't going to wear a polyester blend. Again, it's strange, but it's distinct. It's something that gives these people an identity, right? You would notice who was and who wasn't an Israelite just by their clothes. Again, that's something we can understand. You can tell a lot about people from their clothes, even to this day. Grooming, there are laws about shaving or wearing your hair in a way that looks pagan, as well as tattooing, a way that I think clearly ties into ways that other nations would have been doing things. This is also in Leviticus 19. Then there are these impurity or washings, these laws about washings and impurity and cleanliness. I mean this in a little bit of a silly way, but have you ever been in a different country and needed to use the bathroom and been thoroughly surprised by that experience? Listen, not everyone does that the same way that we do, okay? And Israel, by command of God, did not use the bathroom the same way that everyone else did. They had to go outside of camp. It was written in their law, and it was a distinct custom that they had that was different from many other nations, as well as the touching of a dead body. Other nations would probably not have any problem touching or burying a dead body and coming back into camp. But in Israel, according to their law and their customs, new customs, right? Like 1 minute you're in Egypt working as a slave, you can touch whatever dead bodies you want. And then the next minute, Moses comes down off the mountain and no more of that. Your customs are different now. If you touch a dead body, you're unclean. If you touch blood, you're unclean. If you are a woman going through certain bodily functions, you're unclean. If you come into contact with other bodily discharge, you're unclean. If you go through childbirth, you're unclean. If you touch the dead, you're unclean. This is all extremely unique to the Israelite customs. And what God is doing is he is creating a people with their own customs, with their own citizenship, so to speak. Language, of course, the Israelites had in the Ten Commandments that they were not to bear false witness and they were not to take the Lord's name in vain. I think that one has a much more significant connotation, but certainly the way that the Israelites lived that out was you don't say God's name and you don't say lies. That's the way they lived out these parts of the Ten Commandments. Loyalty or allegiance would be a significant part of citizenship. If you're a citizen, you have a hierarchy of loyalty, right? I am more loyal to this nation than that nation. Well, certainly Israel had that as well. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, it's the Shema, one of the most famous and well-known passages in all of the law. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You'll love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." Heart, all your soul. See, I mix these up because Jesus adds one when he recounts the Shema. He says heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I can never remember if he adds soul or if he adds mind. But regardless, you see the allegiance. This is not a part of you that you are pledging to God. This is all of you that you pledge to God. And you're meant to teach that to your children. This loyalty is not just something that is individual, but it's something that is meant to go on throughout the ages. Identity, as we have already said, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of rescued slaves, delivered slaves, the people who were rescued and delivered. I think the more you study, the more you read through the laws, as exhilarating as it is, it becomes clearer and clearer that what God is doing with the old law was on purpose. It was on purpose. Like, he was creating a people. He was creating a citizen, the kind of person that he wanted to follow him at that time and in that way. And so then, in the New Testament, we're presented with this passage in Philippians chapter 3, where Paul says, our citizenship is in heaven. and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. This is a metaphor that I think extends right into where we are right now. So when you think about this and you draw that metaphor out a little bit more, what does it look like to be a citizen of heaven? Well, okay, we got the vision, right? A citizen of America, we painted our caricature, all right? A citizen of Israel, we looked at the law and it's plain. There is a good Israelite with the right values and the right customs. So then what does it look like to be, or what does it mean? What does it really mean to be a citizen of heaven? Well, let's start the same way we started with Israel. What about holidays? Do we celebrate anything as citizens of heaven? Well, absolutely we do, right? Like every Sunday we get to show up and celebrate. We celebrate when we partake of the Lord's Supper. Of course, celebrating isn't usually the vibe that we choose, but it is truly a celebration, because if we were just remembering the death and there was no resurrection, why are we celebrating? Why are we remembering? This is what we're remembering. Every Sunday we get together as Christians on the first day of the week, like Mike read for us this morning out of 1 Corinthians 11. We come together and we remember the Lord's death until he comes. The implication, you do it and you teach it to your children and to your children's children, just like ancient Israel was intended to. And so certainly we have holidays. We have a rhythm to our life. Every week we wake up and we remember the Lord's death. Every Sunday we wake up and we gather together with fellow Christians and we worship God. This is part of what it means to live as a citizen of heaven. What about history or a shared story, as some people will call it when we're talking about culture? Well, absolutely. A citizen of heaven is stepping into an existing stream of God's story of redemption. This isn't like, I know often we think about this as God was doing one thing and then Jesus, he's doing a new thing. But in every way, when you read the Bible as a coherent narrative, this is the way God planned always to redeem humanity, to save souls. It was always through Jesus. He wasn't a divergence or a last-ditched effort. He was the plan from the beginning. And so as Christians, as citizens of heaven, man, we step right into that stream of God's plan to redeem and to save the world from sin and death. Part of our story is also that we are just like Israel, we're these rescued slaves. Like we used to be slaves to sin, but now we're free in Christ. And he did that so that we could be free, Paul says in Galatians chapter 5. He says, for freedom, Christ set you free. So don't go back to slavery, which is an interesting thing to have to tell someone who's been set free until you remember that story in Exodus when the slaves got set free and immediately what did they want? Slavery. They wanted it back so badly. Part of our story as citizens of heaven is that we're rescued slaves, which is going to produce a certain kind of person. If you remember that you are not just the biggest and the best, but you were saved. Like your life was rescued. That's going to shape the kind of person, the caricature of a citizen of heaven. I mean, certainly it's going to produce someone who is humble. I didn't save myself. I didn't pull myself out of the pit. I was rescued. What a beautiful image that our story tells. What about our values? I mean, you just about read the entire Sermon on the Mount if you want some values. But for the sake of time, we'll look at just a couple. Matthew chapter 5, the Beatitudes, I think, highlight several of these really, really well. In heaven, citizens of heaven, a citizen of heaven is someone who values mercy. Matthew 5 and verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. In heaven, we're not the kind of people who seek our own vengeance, who get an eye for an eye, but that's a distinct difference from the law that was in the law that was in the law. The laws that were in the law. Maybe that's still convoluted. Sorry. You know what I'm saying at this point in context. In the old law, it was an eye for an eye, right? There was justice in the new law. Citizens of heaven, though, man, their values have mercy above so many of these things. The citizens of heaven value peace. In verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Sons of God are the people who value peace. What does a citizen of heaven look like? It looks like someone who prioritizes peace over conflict. They make peace. Sometimes in wisdom, we know that means you have to go through some conflict. But making peace is a priority and a value of citizens of heaven. Thirdly, citizens of heaven value forgiveness. Look at Matthew chapter 6, a verse that I'm sure a lot of us are very familiar with. It says 6 and verse 14, for if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. This is one of the core values of a citizen of heaven. I don't need to get paid back for the wronging that's been done to me. I forgive. Man, how do you know if this guy's a citizen of heaven? Well, I mean, he forgives so quickly. Why? But because that's a value of citizens of heaven. They forgive. Certainly there are a lot more in that category in terms of values that citizens of heaven are meant to have. But clearly there is an ideal citizen of the kingdom of heaven, and that has a lot to do with these values. What about customs? I thought about just throwing Romans 16 in here and making a really strong case that we all need to kiss each other. I'm not going to do that because obviously I don't believe that, or else I would have been tempting to smooch all of you, which would just make everyone uncomfortable, right? Like there are problems all over the place here. But what do we do about customs? What do we think when we talk about customs? Well, I thought there are a handful of these that, again, come straight out of the Sermon on the Mount. You might argue that they're values, maybe they're customs. You know, my belief about this, the Bible does a lot more than one thing at a time because it's an incredible book written by an incredible God. But when we talk about customs in the kingdom of heaven, one of the first ones that came to my mind was the custom of nonviolence. It is the custom of a citizen of heaven to turn the other cheek. That is a weird thing to do, and it is not a thing you see in a lot of other cultures. And a lot of other citizens of other places, they don't turn the other cheek. But citizens of heaven, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the left also. This is a custom in the citizen of heaven. What about the idea of going the second mile? Citizens of heaven are second milers, if you can turn that into a proper noun, right? Like citizens of heaven go the second mile. They're not the kind of people who just do exactly what's required of them and then stop and let you fend for yourself. Citizens of heaven, their custom is to always do more than what's required of them in an effort to esteem others as more significant than themselves, like Paul writes in Philippians. What about the custom of returning evil with good? More than just turning the other cheek, but listen, if you rip that guy off, he's probably going to give you a gift card. What a weird thing to think. But in the citizen of heaven, in the model citizen of heaven, they don't return evil for evil. They don't get even because their values are forgiveness. So they don't return evil for evil, but they return good when you treat them with evil. Modesty / humility, I couldn't help but think about what Paul writes in 1 Timothy when he tells the women in Ephesus not to adorn themselves with gold or fine jewelry. And I don't think there that Paul is specifically saying wearing earrings is a sin or wearing nice clothing is a sin, but he's clearly talking about how they should adorn themselves, and he says with modesty and self-control. Well, did anyone wear self-control this evening? No, clearly Paul has an idea here of something that is internal rather than external. But of course, what's inside of us comes out, can show itself externally. And so when we think about how a citizen of heaven does things, well, they do things humbly. They do things in a modest way. They're not trying to gain all the attention for themselves. They're not trying to be the center of attention and boast, but they're trying to be humble. Their custom is to avoid the spotlight, to avoid the praise, and to deflect all of that to God where it belongs. What about language when it comes to citizens of heaven? How are they distinct in their language? What does it mean to be a citizen of heaven in terms of how you use your language? Well, again, the Sermon on the Mount is another spot we can go for that. Don't swear by anything. Right? Don't swear by the temple or the gold inside the temple. Simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. Okay, there it is. If a Christian says it, you know it's true. How about that for a citizen of heaven? Well, I mean, that's certainly the way it ought to be. If a Christian says words, you can trust them. You can take them to the bank, right? That is what a citizen of heaven should look like. And more than that, though, certainly honesty is at the forefront of a citizen of heaven and how they use their language. But also, Ephesians chapter 4, let's flip over there quickly because it talks about the kind of words that you ought to use. It's not just that you should always be telling the truth, which is certainly a part of this. But in Ephesians 4, when Paul's talking about, in a lot of ways, what a citizen of heaven ought to look like, they should take off these old garments and put on these new garments, metaphorically. He starts with, in verse 25, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil. Let the thief no longer steal, but let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. So certainly, a citizen of heaven tells the truth. I mean, that's where Paul starts. But also a citizen of heaven is one of the most positive, like unreasonably positive and encouraging people that you run into. And we all have met those kind of people, right? The kind of people that always have something good to say. Well, maybe it's easier to know that that's true when we say we've also met the opposite kind of people. The kind of people that always have something bad to say. Well, certainly, a citizen of heaven, according to the way Paul describes it and the way we see it in the Sermon on the Mount, a citizen of heaven is someone who not only tells the truth always, but also is always looking for a reason to build up or encourage those around them. When we talk about loyalty, certainly a citizen of heaven is someone who is loyal to Jesus. They've pledged their allegiance. They have made the good confession that Jesus is their Lord and their Savior. And when it comes to identity, a citizen of heaven has been given an extremely unique identity. In Ephesians chapter 1, Paul talks about Christians as being adopted into Christ. Like you are children of God through adoption. And so a citizen of heaven, a stereotypical biblical citizen of heaven, is someone who is an adopted child and a child of God, which means they are, in a lot of ways, kind of like Moses. You remember the story of Moses. He gets adopted by the royal family, right? And so it's kind of like the inverse of that in our case. We're not adopted by the enemy in Egypt, but we're adopted by the king of life. And so we are, as I've heard it said before, we're a king's kid. Remember who you are. Right? You can't help but say that. Does anyone else, for them, that line just brings up the Lion King every single time? I mean, that's the sentiment, though. Remember who you are. You're my son and the one true king. Oh, man, what a movie. Anyway, this is what a citizen of heaven looks like. When we look at the Bible, when we ask the question, what does it mean to be a citizen? We get the idea, and I think when we look at it through the lens of an American citizen and the stereotype of that, we get kind of an idea of how that picture is meant to come into form. And then when you look at the Old Testament and the way that God crafted a people through the law, and gave them a culture, gave them an identity, gave them customs, gave them language, gave them history, gave them a shared story, gave them holidays and rhythms to their life, you start to see that, oh, okay, being God's people is being a citizen of heaven. And so this is what I thought as in terms of reflection. Are you a citizen of heaven without having to say it? What I mean is, we said that, if you're an American citizen, it means that the parts of you that go without saying all say American really obviously, right? So let's just use the different language. Do the parts of you that go without saying, your customs, your language, your integrity, your rhythm of your life, the things you do every day, do the parts of you that go without saying, do they all say Jesus very loudly? There's this extremely unique thing to small towns, all right? In small towns, it's like they can smell it on you. You're not from around here, are you? You know what I'm talking about? Like when people see you in a small town, when people see me in a small town, they just have a radar. It's probably the hair or maybe the clothes. There's something about it. I just don't exude small town, right? And so people will see me, and maybe it's a question you ask, right? Maybe it's the words you use. Maybe it's the customs. You say something, and suddenly some old man who looks like he's been sitting in that same chair for the last 200 years says, well, you're not from around here, are you? Because he can see it. Because the parts of you that go without saying don't say Caney, Oklahoma, right? Only 8 people say Caney, Oklahoma. But the parts of you, when you show up, it's obvious. And so when you look at yourself in terms of reflection and you ask, am I a citizen of heaven? Another way to ask is, do the parts of you that go without saying, that you don't think about, do they just scream Jesus? In other words, do people look at you and say, man, you are not from around here, are you? You are entirely too honest. Your values for forgiveness and for mercy are entirely too high in your value system. You clearly are not from around here. I'm afraid that for a lot of us, not specifically anyone, but just Christians in the world today, we look entirely too much like we're from around here. And so it's always good to take a minute and reflect on the idea of being a citizen of heaven. Do I look like I'm from around here? Or do I look enough different that people can see Jesus coming out of me without me even having to say it? Certainly, the end of this lesson wouldn't be complete if we didn't extend the invitation to become a citizen of heaven. Listen, in almost every country in the world, there's immigration process. That if you want to become a citizen of this country, you go through some process and then you are a citizen. And different people show up with different levels of American already in them, all right, in our case. Some people show up and they already speak English. Some people show up and speak very, very broken English. Some people immigrate to America and become citizens and don't speak a lick of English. And they slowly learn more as they live here. As they're a citizen, their transformation takes place. Some people show up and the idea of shaking hands is completely foreign. They're a citizen, but they're not quite American yet. Listen, this is kind of the journey that we go on as Christians. If you want to become a citizen of heaven, we got an immigration process. It's called hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized, all right? You want to become a Christian? You want to become a citizen of heaven? Man, it's right here in the book, and we can show you how to do it. But then after that, the question, because I do know everyone in here, all right? Then after that, the more relevant question for us tonight is, are you looking more and more like a citizen of heaven the longer you live here? Has your English gotten better since you've become a citizen of heaven? English, all right? Are your values the same as they were before you immigrated into the kingdom of heaven? Are you being transformed? Are the rhythms of your life, are your customs, are your values, are your loyalties, is your identity, is your language being changed to look more and more like Jesus every day? Because that's what we're promised as citizens of heaven. transformation, not simply a new legal status. We don't get to be people who live in the kingdom of heaven. We get to be Christians. The difference between living in Texas and being a Texan. And so if you need prayers of the church tonight, or if you need to become a Christian, come on and we'll help you because we love you if you'll come while we stand and sing.